She thought she could hide it. The shaking hands, the missed breaths. The secret growing inside her. But nothing prepares you for the moment the man you've been avoiding. The billionaire who once held you closer than you expected. Picks up the pregnancy test you dropped. Looks you in the eyes. And first, and quietly asks, "Is this baby mine?" If you've ever carried a truth so heavy it nearly broke you, you'll feel this story in your bones. Let me tell you what happened next. The hallway tilted before Claire's eyes, a slow, disorienting sway that made her press her palm flat against the cool glass wall. For a moment, she truly thought the floor might lift to meet her. The air carried a faint scent of copier toner and the citrusy cleaner the janitorial team used every morning at Hale Dynamics. Usually, it calmed her. Today, it only made the nausea rise again. She took a breath that trembled too much for her liking. 10 minutes. That was all she had before she needed to step into the executive conference room and present the quarterly numbers to a dozen people who never missed a flaw. Her vision narrowed, darkening at the edges, and she slipped quietly into the small alcove by the water fountain, hoping no one would see her gripping the counter as if it were a lifeline. Her stomach rolled. She shut her eyes gently, willing her body to cooperate. It was just another wave, one of many over the last 3 weeks. But this one felt sharper, cutting through her ribs, pushing a cold sweat across her forehead. A voice startled her. "Claire? Hey! Are you all right?" She opened her eyes to see Lily, an earnest junior coordinator whose concern came too easily. Claire straightened, smoothing her blazer as if that alone could make her look composed. "I'm fine. Just a long week." "You look a little pale," Lily murmured. "I'll be okay, really." Claire forced a smile she hoped looked effortless, though she felt anything but. Lily hesitated, then nodded and hurried off. When she disappeared around the corner, Claire exhaled slowly, her hand drifting back to the wall for a second of support. She felt the faint tremble in her fingertips, saw the small smudge her touch left on the cold glass. Morning light from the tall windows traced a faint outline of her reflection, sharp suit, steady posture, tired eyes that told the truth she wouldn't. 39 wasn't old, but it wasn't young either, not in a company where fresh graduates climbed ladders as fast as their resumes could catch them. She had built her reputation on being reliable, articulate, unshakable under pressure. There was no room for fragility, no space for unexplained weakness. Especially not now. Especially not with him in the next room. Her stomach tightened again, but she breathed through it, bracing a hand against her abdomen as if the pressure alone could settle the rising panic. She wasn't afraid of the truth itself. She was afraid of losing everything she'd built, afraid of being seen differently, judged differently, afraid of being the kind of woman people whispered about in break rooms. Claire pushed away from the wall, straightening her posture. She adjusted her blazer, brushed a strand of hair behind her ear, and practiced the neutrality she had perfected after years in corporate spaces. One more day of pretending, one more meeting where she forced her body and her thoughts to obey. She could hold herself together for an hour. She had to. She reached for her folder of printed reports when her phone buzzed sharply in her pocket. The vibration startled her enough that she nearly dropped everything. She pulled the phone out, expecting a calendar reminder. Instead, she froze. A message from her assistant. "Ethan moved the meeting up. He wants you in the room now." The words seemed louder than the hallway itself. Her pulse thudded once, hard and deep, the kind of heartbeat that felt like a warning. Not 15 minutes from now. She imagined him sitting at the head of the long oak table, watching the door, waiting for her. And with that image came the memory of his voice, low and warm, from a night she tried every day to forget. Her breath caught. 8 weeks of avoiding him had taken every ounce of discipline she had. She wasn't ready for his eyes, his questions, the quiet intensity that stripped her defenses too easily. The nausea twisted tighter, but she pushed through it, moving toward the double doors at the end of the hallway. Her steps were steady, but the space around her felt too bright, too wide. The glass walls reflected slivers of her figure as she walked, composed in appearance, unraveling underneath. She reached the heavy doors. Her hand hovered over the silver handle as her pulse beat in her ears. She swallowed hard, tasting fear mixed with something she refused to name. This was the moment she had been trying to outrun. The moment she had hoped would never come. Claire stood there for a breath. Maybe two. Her fingers trembling just a little before she curled them into a fist. How could she face the one man she'd been avoiding for 8 weeks, when the secret she carried felt heavier with every passing minute? Claire pushed open the heavy conference room door, and the moment the polished wood swung inward, she saw him. Ethan Hale sat at the head of the long oak table, the floor-to-ceiling windows behind him casting a pale winter glow across his shoulders. He didn't look frustrated about the early start, nor impatient with the delay. His expression held something far worse: concern. Concern aimed directly at her. She felt it land like a hand on her chest. 12 board members turned to look as she crossed the carpeted floor, but her eyes brushed past them, drawn unwillingly back to him. For a fleeting second, something sharp flickered in his gaze: recognition, worry. A question she wasn't ready to answer. She forced her attention to the screen at the front of the room, setting her reports down with hands she hoped didn't visibly shake. "Miss Donovan," Ethan said, his tone steady, almost too gentle. "Whenever you're ready." The words tightened her breath. She nodded once and opened her laptop. "Good morning, everyone," she began, projecting the calm professionalism she'd relied on for years. A graph appeared on the large display. She talked through revenue trends, user engagement, projections. Her voice sounded normal, cool, measured, almost like she wasn't gripping the edge of the podium to keep steady. Halfway through explaining a major shift in market growth, the edges of her vision trembled. A wave of dizziness surged so quickly she had to stop speaking. The numbers on the screen blurred together. Her throat tightened, and she felt the cold slide of sweat down her ribs beneath her blouse. She blinked hard, hoping no one noticed. But someone did. Ethan pushed his chair back so abruptly it struck the wall with a dull thud. A few of the board members startled. Claire lifted her eyes just long enough to see the tension carved across his face, far too visible, far too personal. "Claire," he said quietly, but the room carried his voice. "Sit down." "I'm fine," she murmured, but her knees weakened beneath her. One of the directors quickly pulled a chair beside her as she swayed, lowering herself before she collapsed. Her pulse drummed in her ears. She hated how small she felt in this moment, how exposed. She sensed movement, then felt Ethan kneel beside her chair, far too close for comfort in a room full of people. He angled himself so he could look directly into her face, his hand hovering near her shoulder, as if afraid to touch without permission. "You're pale," he said under his breath. "You're shaking." "It's just a long week," she whispered. He didn't believe her. She saw it in the tight line of his jaw. "Meeting postponed," he said, suddenly louder. One of the board members protested. "But Ethan, we still haven't." "Out." The single word sliced through the room. Chairs scraped back. Papers rustled. No one argued again. The directors filed out with stiff shoulders and sidelong glances, the door clicking shut behind the last one. When they were gone, the silence felt too big, too intimate. Claire kept her eyes on the floor, though she could feel him watching her. She tried to breathe slowly, but her chest fought her. She wished desperately for distance, 10 feet, a hallway, another building, but he was right there, close enough that she could catch the faint scent of cedar and something darker that clung to him. "Tell me what's going on," he said quietly. "I told you. Stress, that's all." He exhaled, not frustrated, something softer. Something that made her stomach twist for a very different reason. His hand rested lightly on the armrest beside her hip, not touching her but anchoring himself there. "Claire," he said, voice low. "You don't get this pale from stress. And you don't almost faint in the middle of a presentation unless something is very wrong." She shook her head. "I just need a minute." He leaned closer, lowering his voice further, the way he had spoken to her on a night she tried not to remember. 8 weeks, he murmured. "You've been avoiding me for 8 weeks. You barely look at me in the hallway. You won't answer my messages. And now this." Her chest tightened painfully. She wished he hadn't said the number out loud. "It's nothing," she whispered. "I just haven't been sleeping well." "That's not true." His tone wasn't harsh, it was hurt. And that was worse. "You think I can't see when you're struggling?" Her eyes stung, not with tears, but with the effort of holding everything inside. "Please," she said softly. "Don't make this harder." He stared at her for a long moment, searching her face. She looked away, unable to hold the weight of his concern. He was too observant, too steady, too familiar with the contours of her expression after that night they'd shared. A night she had spent weeks trying to turn into something insignificant in her mind. But her body had not let her forget. "Claire," he whispered, voice unsteady for the first time that morning. "What are you hiding from me?" The question struck her deeper than she prepared for. It held more than suspicion. There was hurt, longing, worry. She swallowed hard, her pulse a frantic rhythm under her skin. She didn't know whether she wanted to tell him everything right here, in this quiet, sun-washed room, or run again before the truth slipped out. And as she finally lifted her eyes to meet his, she felt the line she'd been walking for 8 weeks tremble beneath her feet, ready to give way. The small cardboard box hit the floor with a sound far louder than it should have made. It wasn't even heavy, yet the soft thud echoed in the quiet boardroom, as if it had struck something deeper. Claire froze mid-step, her breath stitching painfully in her chest. The tote bag slid the rest of the way off her shoulder, spilling pens, a compact mirror, loose papers, and a half-crushed granola bar across the polished hardwood. For a heartbeat, neither she nor Ethan moved. She dropped to her knees automatically, reaching for the scattered items. Her fingers fumbled. Her pulse hammered so loudly she could hardly hear her own breathing. She reached for the folder first, anything to avoid looking at the one object she knew had fallen among the clutter. Ethan crouched beside her. "Let me help," he said, his voice calm, but too close, too gentle. She nodded without looking at him. She couldn't. If she met his eyes, the truth humming beneath her skin might burst open, raw and uncontrollable. She grabbed a pen, a paperclip, the corner of a printed slide. Anything but. He stopped. She felt it more than saw it, the sudden stillness in him, the way his breath caught. Slowly, as if drawn by something he didn't want to understand, he reached under the conference table and lifted the small white box between 2 fingers. A pregnancy test. Not hidden in a wrapper, not tucked away, completely visible. The room held its breath for them. Claire's hand went cold. Her vision blurred for a second. She wanted to snatch it from him, to sweep everything into her bag and run, to pretend none of this was happening. But she couldn't move, her body locked in place, her knees pressing against the carpet, palms flattened uselessly on the floor. Ethan looked at the box, then at her. His expression wasn't anger. It wasn't even confusion. It was something much quieter, something that pierced deeper hurt, threaded with shock. "Claire," his voice cracked softly, "is this yours?" She opened her mouth, but nothing came. Not a word. Not a sound. Her throat tightened until it felt like a fist had wrapped around it. Her identity, the woman who always had answers, who always held herself together, who never let emotions derail her, felt like it was slipping through her fingers. She managed a small inhale, but it wasn't enough to steady her. Ethan stayed kneeling beside her. But he didn't push closer. He held the box gently, as if it were something fragile. Or maybe as if she were. Time stretched. It felt like they had been suspended there for minutes, though it couldn't have been more than a few seconds. The sunlight from the tall windows reflected sharply off the sleek black surface of the table above them. The reflection caught the pregnancy test box, making it appear twice, once in his hand, once mirrored in the gloss. One tiny object, multiplied, that could ruin everything she'd worked for. Her breathing turned unsteady. She forced her hands into fists in her lap to stop them from shaking. "Claire," he said again, softer this time, as if he knew she might break. She shook her head slightly. "Please, just give it back." He didn't. He looked down at the box, then back up at her face. The hurt in his eyes deepened, but beneath it something else flickered. Something close to fear. Or hope. She couldn't tell, and she didn't want to. "Why didn't you come to me?" His voice was barely above a whisper. Her breath faltered, pushing out in a trembling sigh. She could feel the pressure behind her ribs, the panic climbing up her throat. She crawled back a few inches, as if distance might pull the truth back into hiding. But the box stayed in his hand, unmoving, undeniable. He didn't lean forward. He didn't reach for her. He stayed exactly where he was, giving her space while still being impossibly close. The restraint in that small gesture made her chest tighten. She managed to whisper, It's not what you think. What I think," he said gently, "is that you're scared, and that you shouldn't be dealing with this alone." Her eyes dropped to the floor. She couldn't bear the earnestness in his voice. She wasn't ready for the consequences in his stare. If she admitted the truth now, everything would shift: her job, her quiet routines, her fragile control, and him. Especially him. She wasn't ready for what he might feel. Or not feel. Once everything was out in the open, her pulse pounded. Her palms were damp, her throat burned from holding too many unspoken things. She reached out with slow, unsteady fingers, trying to take the box from him. But he didn't let go, and that small resistance, the gentlest refusal, sent a tremor through her. His voice lowered even further, cracking at the edges. "Claire, please don't lie to me. Not about this." She froze again, her hand hovering over his. The warmth of his skin radiated up to her fingertips. The truth hovered on the edge of her lips, dangerous, trembling, ready to spill. She drew a shaky breath, her eyes lifting to meet his. Was this the moment she finally let the truth surface? Or would she run again, before he could see all the pieces of her she was terrified to reveal? 8 weeks earlier, Claire hadn't meant to stand so close to him under the winter lights. The ballroom shimmered with silver garlands and glass ornaments that caught the glow of chandeliers, but she remembered none of it. Clearly only the soft swirl of navy fabric at her waist and the faint scent of pine drifting through the air. She had been trying to keep her distance from the important people, lingering near the silent auction tables, where no one paid much attention to an unfamiliar face. But somehow, without choosing it, she had drifted into Ethan's orbit. The gala had felt like another world, a place built for people, with city penthouses and handcrafted watches. Not for a woman who budgeted her groceries and borrowed gowns from friends. She tugged at the straps of the navy dress, wishing she didn't feel so exposed under the glittering lights. Her heels pinched, her cheeks were warm from nerves, and she hated how easily she could imagine knocking over one of the massive ice sculptures near the stage. She had been reading one of the auction descriptions, something about a private retreat in Montana, when a voice behind her said, "If you ask me, the starting bid is daylight robbery." She turned, and Ethan Hale stood only a foot away, hands in his pockets, posture relaxed in a way she rarely saw at the office. He was usually so composed, so precise. Tonight he looked almost human. "Sorry," he added, a half-smile tugging at his mouth. "Didn't mean to sneak up on you." Claire's breath caught. "I don't think I belong near any of these items," she replied lightly. "I'd be terrified to even touch that painting. You and me both. I'd rather be back at the office, debugging faulty scripts, than having another conversation about potential partnerships." She blinked. "You? Avoiding networking?" His smile deepened. "A well-kept secret. Don't expose me." She shouldn't have laughed. She shouldn't have felt warmth flood her chest at his tone, playful, gentle, almost conspiratorial. But she did. For a moment, she forgot she wasn't supposed to be the kind of woman who held a billionaire's attention. People swirled around them, elegant and busy, but somehow he seemed anchored where she stood. "This event is overwhelming," she admitted. "Then stay close," he said softly. A strange, tender quiet settled between them, but before she could respond, the lights flickered overhead. Once, twice. Then everything fell into darkness. Gasps rippled through the room. Glass clinked. Someone dropped a tray. Music cut out mid-note, leaving an eerie stillness behind. Claire's heart kicked up. She had always hated sudden dark spaces. Her hand brushed against something solid, Ethan's arm. She pulled back, embarrassed, but he caught her fingertips lightly. "Don't move," he murmured. Emergency lights should come on soon, but they didn't. Not for long seconds. The room buzzed with nervous voices and the shuffle of footsteps. Ethan shifted closer. "Claire," he said, low and steady. She nodded, even though he couldn't see it. She felt him guide her gently through the crowd, his hand warm around her wrist. They moved along the wall, avoiding the clusters of people, trying to figure out what had happened. The air felt thicker in the dark, the faint smell of perfume and champagne sharp in her lungs. When a crash sounded behind them, something metallic tipping over, she flinched. Ethan's hand slid instantly from her wrist to the small of her back. "I've got you," he whispered. The words struck deeper than they should have. They found an open door leading backstage just as faint emergency lights blinked to life in the corridor outside. Amber glowed along the edges of the hallway, painting their faces in soft silhouettes. Ethan guided her in and shut the door behind them. The room was small, lined with costume racks and prop boxes, a forgotten place behind the glitter of the gala. The muffled sounds of confusion from the ballroom felt distant here, as though they'd stepped into a pocket of stillness meant only for them. Claire leaned against the wall, letting her breath settle. "Do you think it's serious?" "Maybe," he said. "Security will handle it." He exhaled slowly. "I'm more worried about you." She looked up. "Why?" "You disappeared for a second when the lights went out," he said. "I could hear everyone else moving, but not you." That scared me. She didn't know how to answer that. She didn't know how to process the sincerity in his voice. For a long moment, neither spoke. The amber lighting softened his features, made him look less like the man who ran a billion-dollar company and more like someone who carried the weight of expectations quietly on his shoulders. Someone tired, someone real. Her pulse thudded. She could feel her walls slipping, felt the ache of wanting something she shouldn't want. "I don't usually talk to people at these things," she said, her voice small in the stillness. "I know," he murmured. "That's why I noticed you tonight." She swallowed hard. "You noticed me?" "More than I expected." His gaze lingered, vulnerable for a breath. "More than I should." The room felt smaller, the air warmer. Every instinct in her body fought between stepping back and leaning in. She whispered, "Ethan, this can't." But before she could finish, a loud bang echoed outside the door, someone dropping equipment or slamming a panel shut. She startled, and Ethan reacted without thinking. His hands came to her shoulders, steadying her. "You're all right," he said softly. His fingers were warm. Too warm. Her breath hitched as she looked up, far too close to him now. He hesitated, eyes searching hers, as if asking a question without speaking it. Slowly, inexorably, the distance between them dissolved. His forehead dipped toward hers. She didn't step away. She couldn't. The kiss came gently, at first soft, tentative, then deepened with a slow, aching inevitability. It wasn't impulsive. It wasn't careless. It felt like something that had been waiting for them in the quiet of all their past glances. When they finally parted, her hands trembled against his chest. He whispered, "Tell me this wasn't a mistake." She couldn't speak. The truth pulsed wildly in her, torn between longing and fear. What if this night had been fate? Or the beginning of a regret she wasn't strong enough to face? She had watched him sleep just once before, slipping out of the hotel room like a thief. The winter sun had barely touched the horizon, casting a pale blue glow through the sheer curtains. Ethan lay on his side, one arm draped loosely across the sheets where she had been only minutes earlier. His breathing was steady, deep, unguarded, in a way she had never seen from him at the office. There, he was all sharp lines and certainty. Here, he looked almost peaceful. Maybe that was what frightened her most. Claire stood still for a long moment, her dress folded neatly over her arm, her coat pulled close to her chest. She told herself she only needed a minute to get her bearings, just a minute to understand what last night meant. But the longer she looked at him, at the life he represented, the tighter fear gripped her ribs. She had no business being here. She dressed quietly in the dim light, moving slowly so the zipper wouldn't catch on the fabric and wake him. The room was expensive in that understated way, wealthy people favored, marble bathroom, heavy drapes, a view that stretched across the harbor like a painting. It wasn't ostentatious, but it spoke of a world she had never belonged to, a world that had never made space for someone like her. Her reflection in the large mirror looked unfamiliar. Her hair was tousled from his hands, her lips still faintly swollen from his kiss. She touched her own cheek with a gentleness she rarely showed herself. She looked alive. She couldn't remember the last time she had felt that way, but that made leaving even more necessary. She slipped into her coat, pulling the collar high to hide the neckline of the gown. She wrote nothing, left nothing, no note, no explanation. Anything she wrote would be a doorway he could walk through, and she didn't trust herself to close it. The carpet muffled her footsteps as she walked to the door. She paused, fingers resting on the handle, her chest rising and falling too quickly. Behind her, Ethan shifted in his sleep. She froze. When he settled again, she exhaled shakily. "I'm sorry," she whispered into the quiet. She didn't know if the apology was for him or for herself. Outside, the hallway was empty. She walked toward the elevator, her heels clicking softly. She kept her eyes down, afraid someone would see her and connect dots she wasn't ready to face. When she stepped out into the cold Seattle morning, the air shocked her lungs, sharp with the scent of rain that hadn't yet fallen. The hotel's entrance lights flickered against the wet pavement. A rideshare pulled up, headlights cutting through the dawn haze. She climbed in quickly, wrapping her coat tighter around the borrowed gown hidden beneath. Her breath fogged the window as the car moved away, the hotel shrinking behind her. She didn't look back. In the days that followed, she became an expert at avoidance. Ethan texted twice, then emailed, then tried to stop by her floor under various excuses, project clarifications, marketing questions, minor updates that didn't require his involvement. She ducked into side rooms, left early, changed her lunch schedule. She even switched to an earlier bus route home, just to avoid the chance of crossing paths in the lobby. Each time she saw an unread message from him, her stomach tightened not with dread, but with something she didn't dare name. She told herself she was doing the kind thing, the smart thing, the only thing, but it didn't feel like kindness when she lay awake at night, replaying the way he had touched her, the way he'd said her name, like it meant something. 3 days after the gala, the nausea began. Subtle enough that she blamed stress, skipped breakfast, pushed through. But by day 5, she was running to the restroom before her first meeting. By the end of the week, even the smell of coffee in the office kitchen made her hands tremble. She told HR she had a stomach bug and took 2 days off. She didn't leave the sofa except to get water. She kept her phone face down, unable to bear the small hope that maybe he had reached out again, or the disappointment if he hadn't. On the 3rd day, something in her shifted. She opened her laptop and started researching symptoms. One by one, the tabs filled her screen. She shut it quickly, as if closing the computer could silence the truth. But denial lasted only so long. Finally, on a cold Sunday morning, she drove to a pharmacy on the far edge of town, where no one knew her. She picked up a box, paid in cash, and tucked it deep into her purse. At home, she set it on the bathroom counter and stared at it for a long time, unmoving, barely breathing. Her hands shook when she unwrapped it, shook harder when she placed the test on the edge of the sink. She paced, sat on the tub for a second, stood again, her heart thudded against her ribs. The timer on her phone vibrated softly. 2 lines, pink, clear, unmistakable. Her knees gave out. She slid to the cold tile floor, her palms covering her mouth as a sound escaped her half-sob, half-exhale. She stayed like that for minutes, maybe longer. Her mind spun with everything she didn't know how to face. She was pregnant, with Ethan's child, and she had left him sleeping in a hotel room as if none of it mattered. Her pulse raced. She pressed a hand against her abdomen, small and flat under her sweater. She had built her life carefully, brick by brick, boundary by boundary. She had survived heartbreak before, survived loss, survived disappointments big enough to leave permanent dents. Love was not meant for women like her, and motherhood, this version of it, unexpected and complicated, terrified her more than anything. She leaned her head back against the wall, tears blurring the bathroom lights, and whispered a question she wasn't ready to answer. How long could she hide this? From him? And from herself? Ethan's voice was steady, but his hands were shaking. Claire noticed it when he reached for the office door, the faint tremor in his fingers betraying a storm he was trying hard to contain. The hallway outside his private office was quiet, too quiet, as if the entire floor had stepped back to give them space for a moment neither of them were prepared for. "This way," he said softly. She followed him into the office she had only ever seen from a distance. The lights were dimmed, the soft winter gray from the windows washing across the modern steel and walnut furniture. It felt like stepping into another world, one built for decisions larger than her life had ever allowed room for. He opened the door to the adjoining bathroom and turned to her. His expression wasn't harsh, wasn't demanding, just unbearably gentle. "Take the test," he said. "I'll wait right out here. I'm not going anywhere." That last sentence hit harder than she wanted it to. She wasn't used to people staying. Her throat tightened, but she nodded and stepped inside. The bathroom was immaculate, almost serene. A long marble counter, a mirror without fingerprints, a single drop of water rolling down the side of the chrome faucet before falling into the sink with a soft echo. Her fingers closed around the small box he had picked up moments earlier. It felt heavier now, as if the future itself was packed inside it. She locked the door behind her and leaned against it, exhaling shakily. She could hear the faint sound of Ethan pacing outside, slow steps, back and forth, like he was trying to breathe through the same fear that clamped around her chest. She opened the box with trembling hands. The test lay in her palm, impossibly small, impossibly powerful. "I can't do this," she whispered to herself. But she had already done it. 2 weeks ago. She already knew. And yet, facing the truth with him, waiting outside, ready, steady, unflinching, felt far more terrifying than taking the first test alone in her apartment. She set the test on the counter and stared at it. Her reflection in the mirror looked pale, strained, older somehow. A woman carrying more than her body was ready for. A memory struck her suddenly. Her father walking out of their house when she was 11. The door slamming so hard the pictures on the hallway wall rattled. Her mother's quiet sobs in the kitchen, the sound of a car engine fading down the street. She had promised herself, at 11 years old, that she would never need someone badly enough to be left shattered when they walked away. And now, here she was, holding something she couldn't face alone. Even though every instinct told her to keep her heart locked tight, she pressed a hand over her stomach, her breath catching. There was barely a curve there, nothing visible, nothing real yet except to her. A soft knock on the door broke through her spiraling thoughts. "Claire?" Ethan's voice, low, careful. "You don't have to rush, just breathe, okay?" Her eyes burned. He sounded so close, too close. She didn't know how to let someone stand that near without seeing everything she had kept hidden for years. "I'm fine," she lied, barely above a whisper. Silence answered her. Not the kind that meant anger just waiting. Patient. Steady. She picked up the test. Her grip shook so badly she almost dropped it. She closed her eyes. "You can do this," she told herself. "Even if it breaks you a little." She followed the steps, each motion mechanical, her breath shallow. When it was done, she set the test face down on a tissue and stepped back as if distance could soften what was coming. The faucet dripped again, and again. Each drop a soft ticking, each one louder than the last. Her heart thudded with the same slow rhythm. She wrapped her arms around herself and stared at the door. On the other side, she imagined Ethan standing with his hands on his hips, or pressed to his forehead, or simply waiting with that look he wore when something mattered more than he wanted to admit. She had no right to expect anything from him. Yet the fact that he had stayed, that he hadn't walked out or shut down or run from the fear, made something small inside her ache in a way she wasn't prepared for. The test sat silently on the counter, the answer waiting. She closed her eyes, willing herself to breathe. She reached for it with a hand that felt almost weightless. And as her fingertips brushed the plastic edge, she whispered a question to the quiet room, one she wasn't sure she wanted answered. What am I about to see? She didn't need to look twice. The truth stared back instantly. The two pink lines were so vivid it felt as if the entire room had brightened around them. Claire stood frozen, the plastic test small and sharp-edged in her hand. Her breath caught somewhere between her chest and her throat, and for a moment, she couldn't hear anything. Not the steady drip of the faucet, not the hum of the vents, not even her own heartbeat. She opened the bathroom door slowly, as if the hallway beyond were a different world. Ethan turned the second he heard the latch. He had been standing near the window, hands braced on the edge of his desk, but now he faced her fully. His eyes went straight to the test in her hand. Something flickered across his face, fear first, unmistakable and raw, then hope, startling in its softness. Then a gravity that settled over his features, like he'd been preparing his whole life for a moment he never expected. "Claire," he whispered. She couldn't make her legs move at first, but then she took one step, and another. The carpet felt thick beneath her shoes, each inch closing the distance between them, tightening the ache in her chest. When she finally stood in front of him, she saw how pale he'd become, how tense his shoulders were despite the effort he was making to appear calm. She lifted the test slightly, her fingers trembling. "It's positive." A slow breath escaped him, unsteady, shaky, but not frightened in the way she expected. Instead, he took the test from her gently, as if it were breakable. As if she were breakable. He didn't look away from her, even as he studied it, as if confirming the truth required seeing both the lines and her face at the same time. When he finally spoke, his voice was rougher than she had ever heard it. She blinked at him, the words hitting a place in her chest she tried so hard to keep locked. Weeks of exhaustion, denial, and fear pressed against her all at once. And before she could stop it, her eyes blurred. "I can't." Her voice broke. "Ethan, I don't know how to." He stepped toward her carefully, as though approaching a wounded animal. Then he reached out, giving her enough time to pull away. She didn't. His hands came to her arms first, warm and steady. When she still didn't recoil, he pulled her into his chest. The moment his arms wrapped around her, something inside her cracked open. All the fear she had tried to swallow down surged up, too heavy to carry alone. She pressed her forehead against his shoulder, her breath catching on a sob she didn't mean to let out. His hand slid to the back of her head, his fingers winding slowly into her hair. "I'm right here," he murmured. "You don't have to do any of this alone." She shook her head weakly. "I never meant for you to know. I was trying to manage it, and everything's been happening so fast, and I didn't want to drag you into something you never asked for." "Claire," he pulled back enough to look at her. His hands stayed on her shoulders, firm, grounding. "You didn't drag me anywhere." Her eyes darted away, but he leaned in slightly, bringing her focus back to him. She could see the faint reflection of the Seattle skyline behind him, lights scattered across the dark water like distant stars. He rested his forehead against hers, their breath mingling in the quiet space between them. She felt the warmth of him, the steadiness, the way he wasn't running or shutting down or panicking. It frightened her more than if he had. Her hands came up without thinking, gripping his shirt just above his ribs. "I don't know if I can trust this," she whispered. "I don't know if I can trust myself." He drew in a slow breath, his voice low and steady. Her chest tightened. That was the problem. She wanted to. She closed her eyes, letting the weight of the moment settle. He stayed close, a quiet presence holding her together, even as she felt herself unravel. When she finally opened her eyes, he was watching her with a gentleness that should not have belonged to a man like him, a man who made decisions that shifted markets and controlled rooms with a single look. He lifted a hand to her cheek, brushing away a tear she hadn't realized had fallen. Her breath stalled, his thumb stilled against her skin. "Is the baby mine?" There was no accusation in his tone. No anger. Only a fragile hope he was trying desperately not to cling to too tightly. She swallowed. Her voice was barely audible. "Yes, you're the only person it's yours." For a second, he closed his eyes. His shoulders eased, but not with relief alone, something deeper. Something that weighed as much as it lifted. When he opened his eyes again, they burned with emotion. Not triumph. Not fear. Something closer to devotion. Something she wasn't ready to name. He exhaled a breath that trembled slightly. "Then we're in this together," he whispered. Her heart thudded painfully. She didn't know what together meant. She didn't know if either of them did. But now the truth tied them in ways neither could undo, and she had no idea what would happen next. The security alert came in quietly, a soft beep, a flash of red across Ethan's tablet. It was subtle enough that Claire might have missed it. But Ethan stiffened instantly. His hand moved to the device with the precision of someone conditioned to expect danger even in moments of calm. "Stay here," he said, though he didn't step far. His voice had dropped into something lower, something edged with command. Claire watched him swipe quickly across the screen. Lines of red code reflected onto the office window behind him, faint but ominous, like warning flares against the winter gray. "What is that?" she asked. He didn't answer right away. His jaw locked, and he tapped the screen again, harder this time. A second later, the office door opened without a knock. Paul Rowan, head of security, stepped inside. He had always intimidated her from a distance, tall, quiet, with a gaze that scanned rooms before his body even entered them. Today, he looked even more severe. "Sir," Paul said, "we have a breach." Ethan turned fully toward him. "From where?" "We're still tracing, but the access was routed through multiple foreign servers. Whoever did this knew exactly what they were doing." Claire's pulse started to thrum. "Accessed what?" "Accessed." Paul hesitated only a second before answering. "Your employee profile, Miss Donovan." She froze. Ethan's face tightened. "What was accessed?" "Everything," Paul replied. "Home address, emergency contacts, banking details, performance records, old HR documentation, even health insurance claims. Whoever infiltrated the system targeted her specifically." The air in the room changed. It felt heavier, denser, pressing against her ribs. "Why would anyone do that?" Claire whispered. Ethan stepped closer to her, instinctively positioning himself between her and the door. "Because they know she matters to me." Her breath caught. It wasn't the statement itself that shook her, it was how simply he said it. As though it were a fact he wasn't afraid to put into the world. Paul tapped the tablet again and pulled up a blurred, shifting IP trail. "There's more," he said quietly. "The method used, it matches tactics we've seen before." Ethan's eyes narrowed. Garrett Colton. Garrett Colton. Claire didn't know the name, but the way Ethan said it made her stomach tighten. Paul nodded once. "We're 90% certain." Ethan muttered something under his breath, a name, a curse, or maybe a memory. Then he looked at Claire. "Garrett was my co-founder when we started the company 15 years ago. Brilliant, ambitious, ruthless. When I refused to license our early AI model to foreign investors, he left and started his own venture. And he's been obsessed with undermining Ethan ever since," Paul added. "Close to you." The words landed heavy, unfamiliar, and strangely tender in Claire's chest. "But I'm nobody," she protested softly. "Why would someone like this man come after me?" "Because you're not nobody," Ethan said. "Not to me." Her lips parted, but no sound came. She couldn't think past the pressure building in her chest. Paul turned his attention back to Ethan. Claire's breath stilled. "My home? Your address was accessed," Paul said gently. She imagined her small apartment, the chipped paint near the windowsill, the creaking hallway. the quiet comfort of a space that finally felt like hers after years of instability. The thought of a stranger, of anyone standing outside her door, sent a chill through her bones. "I can't just leave my life behind," she said, her voice cracked slightly. "I have work, rent, a routine. I can't just disappear." Ethan moved another step closer. "This isn't disappearing, it's staying safe." She shook her head. Safety was never simple for her. Safety was something other people got, people with money, connections, families who checked in. She had built her stability carefully, piece by piece, and the idea of uprooting any of it made her numb. "I don't know how to live in a world where someone wants to hurt me to get to you," she whispered. Ethan's expression softened, pain flickering across his face. He reached out, but he stopped before touching her, giving her the choice. She didn't step back. "You won't be hurt," he said. "I won't let that happen." His certainty should have comforted her. Instead, it terrified her how much she wanted to believe him. Paul cleared his throat. "We recommend protective relocation, temporary, until we secure her information and confirm Colton's movements." Claire wrapped her arms around herself. "Relocation? Where?" "We have a safe property outside the city," Paul said. "Secure? Monitored? Isolated?" Her heart hammered. "I can't just vanish into some bunker." "It's not a bunker," Ethan said, gentler now. "For how long?" she asked. Silence. No one had an answer. She stared at the test in Ethan's hand, still faintly visible from earlier. The truth she had feared was already rewriting her life, and now danger real. Tangible danger was pulling at the edges of her world. One moment she had been hiding a secret. The next, someone out there was hunting for it. "How am I supposed to agree to this?" she whispered. Ethan looked at her with something fierce and fragile all at once. "Because I'm asking you to trust me. And because I need you safe more than I need anything else." Her throat tightened. The office felt too small, the walls too close, the future too uncertain. She swallowed hard. "And if I say no?" He didn't answer. The silence was answer enough. Claire closed her eyes for a long moment, trying to gather the pieces of a life that suddenly felt like it belonged to someone else. When she opened them, Ethan was still there, waiting, afraid, unmoving. She drew a shaky breath. I don't know if I can do this." The question that hung between them was one neither of them dared to say aloud. Would she agree to disappear for her safety, for her child, for a man she wasn't sure she could trust with her heart? For the first time that day, Claire stood straighter than she felt. The windows of Ethan's office framed the Seattle skyline in shades of early evening blue. The city lights flickering awake behind her like scattered signals of a world she refused to vanish from. Her knees were still shaky, but she locked them in place and lifted her chin. "I'm not going to a safe house," she said. Ethan had been pacing, tension coiled through every line of his body. At her words, he stopped, so abruptly the room felt still around him. "Claire, it's not optional. It is for me." He exhaled sharply, as if trying to hold his temper still. "Someone accessed your home address. They targeted you deliberately. I can't risk." "You don't get to decide that," she cut in, her voice steadier than she expected. Paul stood near the door, silent, unreadable. Claire felt his gaze flick between them, but she refused to look away from Ethan. "I've worked too hard for my independence," she said. "This isn't intimidation," Ethan replied, stepping closer. "It's a threat. And you're carrying my—" She raised a hand, stopping him before the word child left his lips. The sound of it right now might break her resolve. And she needed that resolve to stay sharp. "Don't say it like that," she whispered. "Not like the only thing that makes me worth protecting is the baby." The words caught him off guard. She could see it in the way his shoulders loosened, his expression shifting from command to something more careful. "That's not what this is," he said. "I'm trying to keep you safe." "I know." Her voice softened, though her spine stayed straight. Silence settled between them, thick with all the things neither of them knew how to say. Paul subtly shifted his weight, as if preparing to step out and give them privacy, but he didn't move. Claire turned toward the window. Her reflection appeared faintly in the glass, small, tired, but somehow unyielding. The skyline behind her looked impossibly vast, filled with people living their lives, making choices, fighting their battles. "I've been on my own since I was 19, she said quietly. "Everything I have, I built one paycheck at a time." "It's more than might," Ethan said, his tone low but trying to stay gentle. "Garrett Colton doesn't make casual moves. If he accessed your file, he has a plan. But I have one too," she said. "It's called standing my ground." His brow creased. "Claire. No, listen." She turned back to him, arms folded lightly across her chest, not in defensiveness but to keep herself from shaking. "I'm scared. I'm terrified. I won't pretend otherwise. But if I go into hiding, what happens next? What am I teaching myself? What am I teaching?" She stopped. The word baby hovered on her tongue, too heavy, too fragile. "What am I teaching my life?" she corrected softly. "If I run now?" Ethan stepped closer. Close enough that she could see the faint worry lines near his eyes, lines she had never noticed before. "Claire, you wouldn't be running. You'd be choosing safety." "No," she shook her head. "I'd be choosing fear." The room absorbed the weight of her words. He looked at her for a long moment, really looked, until something in his expression shifted. Not anger, not frustration, understanding, maybe even respect. "You think going into hiding makes you powerless," he said. "It does," she answered. "I've spent my entire life trying to prove I'm more than what people expect. And the moment things get difficult, I'm supposed to disappear? I can't do that. I won't." Ethan rubbed a hand along his jaw, a gesture she had seen only when he was wrestling with something he didn't want to accept. He turned toward Paul. "Give us a moment." Paul nodded and slipped out, closing the door with a soft click. When they were alone, Ethan walked to the window and stood beside her, both of them gazing at the city below. Cars slid along wet streets, streetlights glowing in halos. The world looked ordinary, but Claire felt anything but. "I don't want to control you," Ethan said at last. "I don't want to put you in a cage and call it protection." She breathed in deeply, relieved he understood at least part of what she was trying to say. "But I also can't stand the thought of something happening to you," he continued. "Not after everything we've just learned. Not now." She swallowed, the pressure behind her ribs building again. "I want safety. I do. For myself, and for what comes next. But I can't lose who I am to get it." He turned to her. "Then we find another way." Her eyes lifted to his, startled. "What does that mean?" His answer was steady, but she could hear the uncertainty beneath it, the acknowledgement that he was committing to a path he hadn't yet mapped. "It means," he said slowly, "we protect you without taking your life apart." Her heart thudded once, deep and hard. The air in the room felt different, charged with something that might become hope if she let it. "Another way," she repeated quietly. But what way? What solution existed between danger and disappearing? The question hung between them, soft but heavy, waiting for the next step neither of them could yet see. The elevator opened, and an elegant woman in her 60s stepped out as if she already knew everything. Claire had never seen her before, but something about the woman's calm stride and composed posture made her pulse tighten. She carried herself the way people did when the world listened to them quietly, but with certainty. Ethan straightened almost instinctively. "Mom," he said. "Mom." Claire blinked. This was Marianne Hale, a name she'd seen in countless articles, philanthropic reports, business features. A woman known for restoring broken communities and rebuilding half the libraries in Washington state. And now she was here, walking toward them with eyes that missed nothing. Marianne approached Ethan first, touching his arm in greeting. "You must be Claire," she said. Her voice was warm, textured, carrying a quiet authority that settled the room. "I'm very glad to meet you." Claire could only nod. Something in her chest tightened, not out of fear, but out of the strange comfort in being seen by a woman who radiated steadiness. Marianne glanced at Ethan. I came as soon as Paul told me what happened. Claire felt her cheeks flush. She wasn't used to the idea of people mobilizing, especially not people like this because of her. Ethan guided his mother toward the seating area. We're trying to figure out the safest path forward. Marianne sat gracefully, folding one leg over the other, her expression thoughtful. Well, she said softly, why don't we start with the truth? Her kind eyes turned to Claire. Are you in danger, dear? The gentle directness of the question made Claire inhale sharply. Someone accessed my personal information. We think it's Ethan's former partner. She hesitated, then added quietly. And I'm expecting. Marianne's gaze softened the instant Claire said it. Not shocked. Not judgmental. Simply present. I see, Marianne murmured. Then the stakes are far higher than a corporate rivalry. She reached across the small table and took Claire's cold hand in both of hers. Her touch was warm, grounding. I am so sorry you're going through this. Claire swallowed hard. I'm handling it, she said automatically, though her voice trembled. Yes, Marianne nodded gently, I can tell. Women like us often try to hold everything together alone. The words struck deeper than Claire expected. She had spent years pretending she didn't need anyone to steady her. Hearing someone acknowledge it, someone who had likely supported countless lives, made that lonely truth feel seen in a way that almost hurt. Ethan sat beside them, tense but quiet, watching the exchange carefully. Marianne turned to him. His jaw tightened. I'm trying to protect her. I can see that, Marianne said. But protection takes many forms. Something about her tone made Claire look up. Marianne's eyes were sharper now, focused, the way a strategist read a battlefield. Your enemy, Marianne said calmly, is a man who thrives on exploiting weaknesses. He strikes hardest when he thinks someone is unprotected, and he enjoys making his targets feel isolated. Ethan leaned forward. Which is why we recommended the safe house. Marianne shook her head gently. A safe house isolates her even more. It signals fear, vulnerability. Claire felt a strange mix of gratitude and dread sweep through her. So what are you saying? I'm saying, Marianne replied, that sometimes the best way to protect a woman is not to hide her, but to stand beside her in full daylight. Claire frowned softly. I don't understand. Marianne's voice lowered, steady and clear. Garrett Colton won't dare touch someone publicly connected to the Hale family. We have influence, reputation, legal power, media goodwill. If he threatens someone who stands under our name, he becomes the one in danger. Claire felt the meaning settle slowly into place. Her pulse fluttered with confusion and disbelief. You mean, she said quietly, you want us to pretend? To be together? Marianne didn't look away. Not pretend. Just make your connection visible enough that no one would risk crossing it. Ethan's breath caught. Mom, it doesn't have to be dramatic, Marianne continued. No announcements, no statements. But let the world see enough so that it's clear Claire is under our protection. That she is part of something bigger than her employee badge. Claire's stomach tightened. She didn't know how to breathe for a moment. That kind of attention. She shook her head. I don't know how to be a symbol. I'm barely figuring out how to be. She pressed a hand to her abdomen, the words too fragile to finish. I understand, Marianne said softly. You're not ready to be something public when you haven't even had time to be something private. Claire lowered her eyes, her throat tightening. That was exactly it. She wasn't ready for the world to see something she still hadn't allowed herself to fully hold. But, Marianne continued gently, this is bigger than readiness. It's about safety, about protecting your future and your child's by making sure no one sees you as an easy target. Ethan's jaw flexed. Are you sure this is the best route? Marianne looked at him, and something unspoken passed between them. Years of understanding, disagreements, and trust layered into a single glance. I am, she said. You can't fight a man like Colton from the shadows. You beat him by showing he is already lost. Claire felt the room tilt slightly. She had walked into work this morning with nausea in her throat and fear behind her ribs. Now she was standing in the center of a conflict she hadn't asked for, with two people trying to pull her into a world she wasn't sure she belonged to. Marianne's hands squeezed hers gently. "If someone wants to threaten you," she said slowly, "let them understand they'd be threatening a Hale." Claire's breath trembled. It was a promise, a shield, and a doorway she wasn't sure she could step through. The question rose silently in her mind, too heavy to speak. Was she ready for a step that could define the rest of her life? When the office finally emptied, only honesty remained between them. The last of the staff had left the floor, the lights dimmed automatically, and the hum of the HVAC filled the silence that stretched between Claire and Ethan like a fragile bridge. Outside the window, Seattle's evening glow bled into the glass streetlights, flickering over the rain-slicked streets, distant headlights threading along the freeway. Claire stood near the window, arms crossed tightly as if holding herself together. Ethan lingered by his desk, hands in his pockets, watching her with a patience that made her chest ache. No more security briefings. No more interruptions. No more excuses left to hide behind. Just them. And everything they had buried. "You don't have to stand all the way over there," Ethan said softly. His voice was gentle in a way that made her breath catch. She didn't move. "I don't know where else to stand." He nodded, as if he expected that answer. He took a slow step toward her, then another, stopping a respectful distance away, his voice low. "Claire, we need to talk about the last 8 weeks." Her grip tightened on her own elbows. "I know." He studied her, searching her face with a carefulness that felt almost reverent. "I kept trying to reach you, not because I wanted explanations, or because I was angry." His jaw flexed slightly, "but because something happened that night at the gala, and I think you felt it too." Her breath quivered. She looked away, unable to hold his gaze. "Feeling something doesn't mean it's meant to last." "Maybe not," he said. "But running didn't make it go away for me." That struck deeper than she expected. Her heartbeat stuttered. Ethan stepped closer just enough for her to feel the heat of his presence, not enough to overwhelm. "I've been falling for you since that night," he said quietly. "Probably even before that. I just didn't realize it until you left." A soft tremor ran through her. She swallowed the lump rising in her throat. "You don't mean that." "I do." His voice didn't waver. "I mean every word. I mean every word." Claire shook her head, her voice barely holding. "You don't know me." "Not really." "I know enough," he replied. "I know you're strong. I know you care deeply about the people in your life. I know you've built everything you have by yourself." His voice softened. "And I know you'd rather disappear than risk depending on someone who might let you down." Her breath hitched. Ethan's gaze gentled, as though he'd just uncovered something he hadn't meant to touch so directly. "Claire, what happened to you?" he asked. "What made you so afraid to let anyone stay?" The question broke something open. She turned away again, pressing her hand to the cold glass. Her reflection stared back, tired and pale. "I don't trust people to stay," she whispered. "Not after watching my father leave. Not after the relationships that fell apart as soon as I needed something. Not after being told more times than I can count that I was too much or not enough." Her voice cracked. "I learned early that the safest way to survive is to expect nothing. Claire." Ethan's voice was thick with something like grief. She forced herself to continue. "So when I woke up next to you that morning, and I saw your world, your wealth, your power, how people move when you enter a room, I knew I didn't belong in it. I knew the moment you woke up, reality would come crashing in, and I didn't want to be standing there when it did." Her arms tightened around herself. Leaving felt easier than being left. Ethan moved closer, slowly, giving her every chance to pull away. When she didn't, he lifted a hand and touched her elbow lightly, the kind of touch meant not to claim, but to steady. "I'm not your father," he murmured. "I'm not any of the men who hurt you." "I know that," she whispered. "But knowing doesn't erase the fear." "No," he agreed. But facing it together might. She exhaled shakily. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Rain tapped lightly against the window. The distant city noise felt muted, as if the entire world had softened enough to give them room to breathe. Ethan's voice broke the silence. The baby isn't the problem between us. Fear is. He hesitated, then said quietly, "But I'm not afraid of a future with you." Her throat tightened again. "You say that now. But, Claire." He stepped in front of her, so she had to look at him. "I'm asking for a chance. Not a promise. Not a forever. Just a chance to build something real. Something steady. Something that doesn't vanish at dawn." She blinked rapidly, her breath catching in her chest. "I don't want to be a burden." He took her hands gently, lowering his forehead until it almost touched hers. "You're not," he whispered. "You never were." A tear slid down her cheek. He caught it with his thumb, his touch achingly tender. "If you choose to walk away again," he said softly, "I won't stop you. But don't walk away because you think you don't matter. You do. To me. To this child. To whatever future we might have." Her chest rose and fell unevenly. She wasn't used to being held without strings. She wasn't used to being wanted without conditions. She wasn't used to a future where love wasn't something she had to earn. All of it terrified her. But something in his eyes, steadfast, patient, aching with truth, tugged at a part of her she had kept locked away for decades. Was she brave enough to believe him? The answer hovered at the edge of her lips, trembling, fragile, and about to break. Her decision came not with drama, but with a quiet, steady breath. It left her chest in a slow exhale, the kind that loosened something deep inside her ribs, something that had been wound tight for far too many years. When she lifted her eyes, Ethan was still watching her, as if afraid she might change her mind, as if one wrong word might send her slipping through his fingers again. She surprised them both by stepping closer. "I'm tired," she said softly. "Tired of hiding. Tired of being afraid. Tired of living like I'm always on the outside looking in." Ethan didn't speak. His eyes softened, but he held completely still, giving her the space she needed. Claire drew another breath, steadier this time. "I want to do this with you. Not in the shadows, not quietly. If someone is watching me, let them see who I'm standing with." A faint, disbelieving relief washed across his face, followed by something deeper, something like reverence. "Claire," he murmured. "Are you sure?" "I'm choosing this," she said. "Choosing us." Her voice wavered, not from doubt, but from the weight of letting herself say it aloud. "I don't want to keep living small because of old fear." He reached for her hand, but stopped halfway, waiting. She closed the distance herself, their fingers brushing before she slid her hand into his fully. His breath hitched gently, as if the simple gesture carried more meaning than anything either of them had confessed. And in a way, it did. It was the first time she had taken his hand before he offered it, the first time she had led instead of followed, the first time she had chosen without running. "Okay," he whispered. "Then we move forward. Together." They left the office side by side, still holding hands. The hallway was nearly empty, the hum of distant printers and the low buzz of evening lights creating a soft cocoon around them. Claire felt exposed and protected all at once, like stepping outside after a long storm and feeling the quiet world waiting. A pair of security staff stood near the corner, speaking in low tones. When they saw Ethan, they straightened immediately. One of them approached with a tablet in hand. "We're initiating Phase 2 protocols," he said. "Database lockdown, perimeter sweep, and transportation control for departure." Claire tensed instinctively, but Ethan gave her hand the slightest squeeze, solid, reassuring. "It's normal," he murmured to her. "Necessary, but routine." Routine. Nothing about this felt routine to her. They reached the elevator. Its brushed steel doors reflected their silhouettes. Two figures standing closer than colleagues, closer than friends, suspended in a moment that wasn't quite defined but undeniably shifting. Claire's voice came out softly. "I've never had people worry about my safety before." Ethan studied her with a quiet intensity. You do now. As the elevator chimed and the doors slid open, a wash of warm yellow light spilled across the hallway. Claire stepped in first, her pulse steady, her shoulders no longer hunched in self-protection. Ethan joined her, and the doors closed them into a small world of their own. For a moment, neither of them moved. The city stretched far below through the glass panel, Seattle in its winter dusk, lights blooming like small, distant promises. Claire watched the landscape shift as the elevator descended, the city turning from abstract glow to individual buildings, from skyline to neighborhood grid. Ethan stood beside her in the quiet, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his arm, yet he waited again, letting her dictate the pace. She wasn't used to that, someone powerful choosing patience. Someone capable of taking control, choosing instead to honor her timing. Maybe that was why her heart felt strangely light. "Ethan," she said at last, eyes still on the window. "What we're stepping into, I don't know how to navigate it." "You don't have to know today," he said. "One step at a time is enough." She nodded slowly. "I just don't want to lose myself." "You won't," he said firmly. "Not with me. I don't want to change who you are. I just want to walk beside you." Her throat tightened at that. "Beside," she repeated quietly. "Not ahead. Beside," he confirmed. The elevator chimed again. The doors opened onto the lobby floor, quiet aside from the distant sound of rain against the tall window panes. A black SUV was already waiting by the curb outside, security officers near it. Claire's stomach fluttered with nerves, not fear, but the strangeness of stepping into a life she never imagined for herself. She hesitated at the threshold. Ethan noticed immediately. "We can stop here," he said gently. "We don't have to rush anything." She let out a soft, shaking breath. Then she reached for his hand again, this time with intention, lacing her fingers through his fully. His chest rose in a quiet, stunned inhale. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't loud. It wasn't the kind of gesture that made headlines. But for Claire, it was everything. She lifted her chin, looking at the world waiting beyond the glass doors. "Let's go," she said. "I'm ready." Ethan looked at her as if seeing her anew, steady, brave, choosing him, choosing herself, choosing the life growing inside her. Together, they stepped toward the doors, hand in hand. And as they crossed the threshold, Claire felt the question settle in her bones like a whisper on the edge of a storm. What will the world do with this new truth? The news leaked before sunrise. Claire saw the headline while her tea was still steeping on the counter, the steam rising in a thin curl as if even the air didn't dare move too quickly. She hadn't slept much, her body still learning to settle into a new reality, but nothing jolted her awake like the words flashing across her phone. Hale Dynamics, CEO, seen with unidentified woman security incident under investigation. Her breath caught. Her hand tightened around the edge of the counter until her fingers ached. Ethan stepped into the kitchen a moment later, already dressed, his expression tightening when he saw her face. She nodded and turned the screen toward him, his jaw set with a calm, dangerous focus she had seen only a few times before, once at the gala during the blackout, once when security reported the breach. But this time was different. This time the threat led straight to her. "I suspected Colton might try something," Ethan said, voice low. "But not this soon." A cold ripple moved down her spine. "What is he trying to do?" "Force my hand," Ethan replied. "Force yours. If chaos makes you panic, we're easier to manipulate." His eyes softened when he saw the fear flicker across her face. "But he doesn't know you." She didn't feel brave. Not yet. But the way he said it, steady, confident, helped her breathe again. Not long after, his head of security arrived with more details. Garrett Colton had escalated. Emails sent to journalists claiming Claire was involved in corporate misconduct, hints of fabricated evidence, threats of legal action, all designed to create pressure. Claire listened with her arms wrapped tightly around herself, as if holding her ribs in place. "Why?" she whispered. "I've never even met him." "Because you matter to me," Ethan said gently. "And he uses whatever he can to get leverage." It should have frightened her more. Maybe it did. But something else stirred beneath the fear, something steadier. A quiet refusal to let someone like Colton dictate the narrative of her life. Ethan placed a hand on her back. "We're not facing this separately. Not anymore." She looked up. His expression held no hesitation. Later that morning, they stood together in front of a small podium in one of Hale Dynamics' reserved press rooms. The atmosphere was bright but cold, the overhead lights casting thin reflections across the polished floor. Security screened every person entering. Claire felt the tremble building low in her chest, the old instinct to shrink, to hide. She straightened instead. When the camera flashes began, Claire blinked once, letting her eyes adjust. Ethan stood at her right side, close, grounding, yet not overshadowing her. He didn't place a hand on her back or guide her forward. He simply stood with her, letting the space between them speak of partnership rather than possession. The first reporter cleared her throat. "Miss Donovan, do you have any comment on Mr. Colton's accusation that you were involved in sensitive data leaks?" Claire felt every eye on her, thousands more behind screens she would never see. Her pulse thudded painfully. She breathed in, then she spoke, slowly but firmly. "I've worked in this industry for over 15 years. I've built my career on integrity and long hours, not shortcuts or manipulation. Anyone who knows me understands that. And anyone who doesn't," her gaze steadied, "is free to look at the facts." A murmur swept the room. Ethan glanced at her, a flicker of pride in his eyes. Another reporter spoke up. "Are you and Mr. Hale in a relationship?" Her fingers tightened slightly at her sides, but she didn't look away. "I'm standing beside him today because the truth deserves air," she said. "My personal life is not up for speculation. My safety, however, is not negotiable. And I will not apologize for expecting protection when someone breaks the law to target me." There it was. Her voice quiet but unwavering. Cameras flashed. Claire didn't flinch. Ethan stepped forward next. His tone remained measured, controlled. He played a video clip on the large display. Digital logs, timestamps, security traces. Undeniable evidence that Colton's team had infiltrated Claire's file using illegal methods. The room shifted instantly. Reporters began scribbling, whispering. The energy swung hard, suspicion flipping into outrage, then into something like vindication. Colton's smear attempt was collapsing. Claire felt a soft wave of breath leave her chest. Ethan didn't look triumphant. He looked relieved. When the conference ended and security guided them toward a private exit, the hallway felt quieter, almost hushed. Claire leaned lightly against the cool wall, letting tension drain from her shoulders. "You handled that," Ethan said, stopping beside her. "Better than anyone could have imagined." "I didn't know if I could," she admitted. "You did." His expression warmed. "And not because of me. Because of you." For a moment, they simply looked at each other. The storm still raging outside but no longer inside her. She spoke first. "If the danger is fading, what does that mean for us?" Ethan took a slow breath, as if measuring the weight of his next words. "It means we finally get to choose our future, not react to someone else's attacks." Her stomach fluttered, not with fear, but with possibility. The hallway seemed to hold its breath around them. And deep inside, Claire felt the next question rising, one she wasn't ready to speak aloud yet, one that lingered like the final rumble after thunder. What future was she brave enough to choose now? Weeks later, the house felt different, warmer, lived in, softened by the quiet rhythms that had begun weaving themselves through each day. Light pooled across the hardwood floors in slow morning stretches, catching on the edges of coffee mugs, folded blankets, half-read books. The space no longer felt like a place she was visiting. It felt like a place slowly adjusting itself around her presence. Claire sat at the small breakfast table, her fingers wrapped around a mug she hadn't yet taken a sip from. The steam curled upward like a small, private signal of calm. She listened to the faint movement upstairs. Ethan's footsteps, steady and familiar. There had been a time, not long ago, when that kind of closeness would have made her wary, ready to run. Now, the sound settled something inside her. The doctor's appointment had been earlier that morning. She still had the sonogram printout on the table beside her. the black and white shape almost abstract, except for the tiny flicker that had become impossible to forget. Ethan had been the one to hold her hand when the heartbeat filled the room, a soft, rapid rhythm that made her chest tighten. He had looked at her, not at the monitor, not at the doctor, but at her, as though the world had shifted beneath his feet. When he entered the kitchen now, he carried that same quiet steadiness. "You're pale," he said softly, leaning down to brush a stray curl from her cheek. "Do you want to rest a bit?" She shook her head. "Just thinking." He pulled out the chair beside her and sat, elbows resting lightly on his knees. "Anything you want to share?" She hesitated, not because she wanted to hide, but because putting things into words meant acknowledging how deeply everything had changed. "I keep thinking about the last few months," she said. "How close I came to," her throat tightened, "to shutting all of this out, to shutting you out." Ethan didn't interrupt. His silence was patient, not pressing. "I told myself it was for the best," she continued. "That protecting myself meant never letting anyone hold a part of me they could drop." Her eyes lowered to the sonogram. "But then this happened, and suddenly the world didn't let me hide anymore." He reached across the table, placing his hand over hers. His touch wasn't forceful, just present. "Fear can make anyone run," he said. "But courage is coming back, and you did." She let out a quiet breath that felt almost like release. "Some days, I still feel like I'm walking into someone else's life. Then we'll build one that feels like ours," he replied gently. "Not mine, not yours." Something shared. A small smile tugged at her mouth. He always phrased things in a way that made even the uncertain sound grounded. The afternoon unfolded in a slow, comforting rhythm. They sorted mail together, debated dinner options, and paused often when she felt waves of fatigue. Later, they sat on the couch with a blanket draped over them, watching the rain streak across the wide living room windows. Claire rested her head against his shoulder. She felt the rise and fall of his breathing, a subtle, steady reassurance she was still learning to trust. "Your house feels different," she murmured. He glanced down at her. "Like it's been waiting for something, or someone." He slipped an arm around her, pulling her closer. Her eyes drifted toward the coffee table, where the sonogram lay between two coasters. For years, she had trained herself to avoid imagining the kind of life where someone stayed, where someone cared without conditions. Yet here she was held, seen, steady in a way she hadn't known she needed. Another moment passed, filled with nothing but the soft patter of rain and the hum of the house around them. Ethan's voice broke the silence, gentle but certain. "Claire?" She lifted her head slightly. "There's something I want to ask." He hesitated, not for lack of confidence but out of respect. "When you're ready, I'd like you to move in. Not because of the baby, not because of everything that happened, but because I want to build a home with you." The words settled between them like warm light. She felt a sudden rush of emotion, not fear this time, but the weight of being wanted in a way that didn't demand anything from her. Her fingers curled into the fabric of his sleeve as if anchoring herself. "I don't know if I'm ready yet," she whispered. "I know," he said. There was no disappointment in his voice, only patience. "And you don't have to be." She leaned back against him, letting the moment wrap itself around her. The future wasn't a straight line. It wasn't certain or simple, but it no longer terrified her, not in the same way. Outside, the rain softened to a gentle mist. Inside, the quiet felt like a beginning rather than a lull. Claire closed her eyes, one hand instinctively resting over her stomach. She didn't answer him, not yet. The words would come when she had shaped them fully. For now, she let hope settle gently in her chest, not loud or dramatic, but steady and real. A future was waiting, and for the first time, she believed she might be ready to walk toward it. Sometimes, healing begins in the quiet spaces we once tried so hard to avoid. Not in grand gestures, not in perfect plans, but in the small, trembling moments when we finally let someone see the truth we've been carrying alone. What Claire discovered, and what many of us learn far later than we expected, is that strength isn't the absence of fear. It's the decision to keep moving, even when fear sits heavy in the chest. and to let a gentle hand steady us when our own hands shake. And sometimes the life we've spent years protecting ourselves from is the very life that ends up giving us back a sense of safety we never knew we deserved. There's a kind of courage in letting yourself be loved without shrinking, a kind of dignity in choosing not to run anymore, and a quiet grace in realizing we don't have to earn tenderness, we only have to allow it. If you're standing at the edge of a new chapter, unsure whether to trust what's unfolding, may you feel reminded that hope often grows in the very places where fear once lived, and that it's never too late to start again, gently. Thank you for spending a little of your day with this story. Your presence here, your quiet companionship truly matters more than you know. If the story touched something in you, even gently, a like, a share, or a subscribe helps us carry these moments of kindness a little farther into the world. Wishing you warmth, calm evenings, and the kind of peace that stays.